The day I signed the papers for the new house, I thought I was stepping into the kind of life people dream about. Quiet streets lined with trees, well-kept lawns, neighbors who waved when you drove by, and the sense that I had finally earned a slice of peace after years of hard work. What I didn't realize was that peace would come with a price tag no one warned me about. That price tag had a name. Her name was Karen. The moving truck pulled up in front of the house just as the sun was sinking behind the rooftops. I was sweaty, tired, but happy. My wife would be joining me later that evening once she finished up at her office. For now, it was just me, lugging boxes out of the truck and stacking them in the garage. That's when I heard the sharp click of heels on the pavement. I looked up and there she was, a middle-aged woman with a perfectly pressed blouse, expensive haircut, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge of authority. Her eyes narrowed at me like I was already guilty of some crime. She didn't say hello. She didn't introduce herself. She barked out, "Are you the new owner?" I smiled, trying to keep things friendly. "Yes, ma'am. Just moved in today. Beautiful neighborhood you got here." She ignored the compliment. Her pen scratched something onto the clipboard. "Well, you should know this community has very strict rules. Lawns must be cut every Saturday. No vehicles parked overnight on the street. Trash cans may only be placed outside between 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Fences cannot exceed 4 feet. And front-facing garden ornaments must be approved by the board. I'll send you a copy of the rulebook." I nodded politely. "Of course. I'll make sure to look it over." Her eyes scanned me up and down like she was searching for flaws. Then with a sniff, she spun on her heel and walked away. I stood there, box in hand, thinking, well, that's one way to welcome a neighbor. By the time the last of the boxes were stacked inside, I heard another car pull into the driveway. My wife, Sarah, had arrived. She stepped out of her sedan in a tailored blazer, her dark hair tied neatly back, her presence as confident as always. Sarah was a real estate attorney, and one of the sharpest legal minds I knew. She'd fought corporations, developers, and even city councils, and won. But at that moment, she was just my wife, smiling at me, ready to make this house our home. What neither of us knew was that Sarah's arrival would spark the fuse that turned this neighborhood into a battlefield. Sarah had barely grabbed her first box when the click of heels returned. Karen was back, this time moving even faster. She cut across the driveway like she owned it, stopping directly in front of Sarah. "Who are you?" Karen demanded. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Who are you? Are you a mover? A relative? You're not listed on the purchase record I saw." I stepped forward, my patience thinning. "She's my wife. We own this house together." Karen's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, really?" Because from what I reviewed, her name wasn't there. She tapped her clipboard like it was some kind of holy writ. Sarah's expression didn't waver. "Calm, collected," she said. "Actually, it is. Perhaps you're looking at outdated information. The deed is in both our names. Do you often check other people's private property records?" Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her face flushed red, the kind of crimson that comes when someone's pride takes a direct hit. She muttered something under her breath and stormed off. Sarah carried her box inside without another word, but I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. We thought that was the end of it. Just another nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. But 20 minutes later, as we were unpacking in the kitchen, there was a knock at the front door. I opened it to find 2 uniformed police officers standing on the porch. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a call about a possible trespassing situation." I blinked, stunned. "Trespassing?" "This is my house." The officers stayed calm, professional. "We just need to check a few things. Is everyone inside supposed to be here?" Before I could answer, Karen appeared from across the street, striding over with the air of someone about to win a prize. She pointed directly at Sarah. "That's her. She just showed up here and started moving things in. I don't believe she has any legal right to be here. I'm concerned for the safety of the neighborhood." Sarah set down the box she was holding and straightened up. Her voice was cool, firm. "Officers, my name is Sarah Khan. I am the co-owner of this property. Here are my identification and the deed to the house, which clearly lists me as one of the owners." She pulled the documents from her bag and handed them over. The officers studied them carefully, exchanging a look before nodding. "Everything was in order," Karen sputtered. No, that can't be right. She wasn't on the original paperwork I reviewed." Sarah cut her off with precision. "Perhaps next time, instead of illegally accessing property records and harassing residents, you could mind your own business." This is my home. And for the record, this is harassment. Please make a note of it. The officer looked at Karen and said flatly, "Ma'am, this is not a criminal matter. They have the right to be here. Please refrain from making further unnecessary calls." Karen's face twisted with frustration. She huffed, turned on her heel, and stomped away, muttering about keeping standards and protecting the community. The officers apologized for the inconvenience, handed Sarah her paperwork, and left. When the door closed, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Well," I said, "that was fast." Sarah smirked, her confidence radiating. "That woman just made a huge mistake. She doesn't know it yet, but she picked the wrong person to mess with." I believed her. I'd seen Sarah in courtrooms, dismantling arguments piece by piece, her opponents walking away dazed and defeated. And as I watched her that evening, calmly arranging our things as if nothing had happened, I realized something. Karen thought she'd scared us. She thought calling the cops would intimidate us, maybe even push Sarah out. But in just 20 minutes, she had awakened a storm she couldn't control. What Karen didn't know was that the woman she tried to label as a trespasser was the same woman who would soon stand in front of her, armed with the law, and serve her the papers that would end her reign of terror. And in that moment, I couldn't help but smile. The war hadn't even begun, and Karen was already losing. The next morning, the neighborhood looked picture perfect, the kind of quiet suburban dream people post on postcards. But to me, it felt different. I knew somewhere behind one of those neatly trimmed hedges, Karen was watching. The woman had already shown me how far she was willing to go in less than a day. And if I'd learned anything about people like her, it was that they didn't back down. Sarah, however, was unfazed. She sipped her coffee at the kitchen counter as though nothing had happened, flipping through a thick binder she'd pulled from her bag. I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I asked. "The HOA bylaws," she said casually. "I had my assistant download them from the county records before I left work yesterday. If Karen wants to play this game, we need to know the rulebook better than she does." I laughed, shaking my head. "We haven't even unpacked the boxes yet, and you're already building a case?" Sarah smiled, her eyes sharp. "Last night she tried to have me arrested in my own home. That was step 1. Step 2 will be fines, letters, intimidation. I've seen this before. HOA bullies get power drunk. They think rules are weapons, but what Karen doesn't know is that rules work both ways." I should have felt worried, but instead I felt something close to excitement. I knew my wife. When she set her sights on something, she didn't just fight, she won. By noon, Karen made her next move. I was out front adjusting the lock on the mailbox when I heard her voice calling out to me. She was standing on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, a smug look plastered across her face. "I thought I should let you know," she began. "The board met informally last night. You're already in violation." I raised an eyebrow. "Violation? We just moved in." Karen tapped her clipboard. "Your lawn. It hasn't been mowed. Our rules state lawns must be maintained to community standards. That's a $50 fine." I looked at the patch of grass, barely ankle-high and clearly just neglected by the previous owner. "Karen, I've been here less than 24 hours. "Doesn't matter," she snapped. "The rules are the rules." "Ignorance isn't an excuse," I bit back a laugh. This was exactly the petty nonsense Sarah had predicted. "You'll be hearing from us," I said, then turned and walked inside before she could reply. Sarah was waiting just behind the door, having heard everything. Her eyes gleamed. Perfect. She just gave me what I needed. That evening, Sarah spread papers across the dining table. She highlighted sections of the bylaws, scribbled notes, and cross-referenced local housing codes. I watched as she pieced it together, a predator circling her prey. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "Fines can only be issued after a formal written notice and a hearing before the board. She can't just walk up with a clipboard and invent numbers. And here, lawn maintenance violations must be given a 7-day correction period before fines accrue. She's already breaking her own rules." I grinned. "So she thinks she's catching us, but she's actually digging her own grave." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. But we don't rush. We let her pile up mistakes. The more she abuses her power, the stronger our case will be when we hit back." Over the next week, Karen escalated. A notice appeared taped to our front door claiming our trash cans had been out too long. Another claimed Sarah's car, a perfectly legal Sutton, was not authorized for overnight parking. Each came with a fine attached. Each one was nonsense. Neighbors started whispering to us too. An elderly man 2 doors down leaned over his fence one morning. "Don't let her scare you," he said in a hushed tone. "She's been running this place like a dictatorship for years. She fined me for having Christmas lights up in January. My wife was in the hospital at the time and Karen didn't care. A young couple told us they were forced to repaint their shutters because the shade of blue wasn't community approved. Another family said they'd stopped using their driveway for barbecues because Karen complained about unauthorized gatherings. Every story was the same. People were tired, angry, but too intimidated to fight back. Karen thrived on that fear. One night, as Sarah reviewed the growing stack of bogus fines, she said, "This is bigger than us. She's been bullying this entire community, but the difference is we have the tools to stop her." I leaned back, watching her in awe. "What's the plan?" Sarah's smile was slow, deliberate. "First, we gather evidence. Every notice, every interaction, every witness. Then we file complaints with the county. And finally," she tapped the thick binder of bylaws, "we use their own rules to kick her off the board." The thought of Karen stripped of her clipboard and authority was almost too delicious to imagine, but Karen wasn't done pushing. The following weekend, she escalated in a way that made it clear she was desperate to scare us off. We woke up to find a bright red sign staked into our yard. "Property in violation. Subject to lion." Sarah stared at it, her face unreadable. I felt my stomach twist. "She can't do this, right?" Sarah pulled out her phone and snapped pictures. "No, she can't. She's bluffing. HOAs can only place liens after extensive due process, and even then, it has to go through court. This is intimidation, plain and simple." As she documented everything, Karen appeared at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, her expression smug. "If you two can't follow the rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." Sarah walked right up to her, her voice steady but cutting. "And if you can't follow the law, Karen, maybe this isn't the right role for you." For the first time, I saw Karen's composure crack. It was just a flicker, a twitch of her lips, but it was there. Sarah had gotten under her skin. That night, over takeout boxes at the dining table, Sarah finished drafting the first round of paperwork. "Tomorrow," she said, sliding the documents across to me, "we start putting the pressure on. I'm filing complaints with the county housing authority, and I'm contacting every neighbor she's wronged. She thinks she's the queen of this street, but she's about to find out the crown was made of paper." I picked up the papers, scanning the precise legal language. It felt like holding a sword, and I knew then that Karen's days of ruling through fear were numbered. The war was no longer silent. It was official. And as Sarah leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with determination, I realized Karen hadn't just picked a fight with us. She had picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to tear her empire apart. One clause, one bylaw, one eviction notice at a time. By the third week, our home looked less like a place we had just moved into, and more like a legal war zone. The dining table was no longer a table. It was a command center. Stacks of papers, copies of bylaws, photos of the ridiculous fines Karen kept taping to our door, and a growing list of neighbors willing to talk about their own battles with her. Karen must have sensed we weren't bending. The fines grew more absurd. A letter arrived accusing us of noise disturbances, despite the fact that we hadn't even plugged in the television yet. Another accused us of illegal modifications to the property simply because we had replaced a broken light bulb on the porch. She was desperate, grasping at straws, hoping one of her fabricated charges would stick. The final straw came late one Friday evening. I had just returned from taking out the trash when I noticed a folded piece of paper stuck under our front mat. It wasn't on official HOA letterhead. It was handwritten, messy and dripping with venom. "Leave before it gets worse. People like you don't belong here." I froze, staring at the note. For the first time, a chill ran through me. This wasn't just fines and fake violations anymore. This was personal. Sarah read the note, her jaw tightening. "She's escalating because she's losing control," she said. "And when people like her lose control, they lash out. But this is good, it means we're close." I wasn't sure I agreed. "Sarah, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is a threat." She placed a hand on mine, steady and firm. "And threats are exactly what the county investigators take seriously. We document it. We use it." The next morning, Sarah went door to door. For the first time since moving in, I saw just how much damage Karen had done. At one house, a woman in her 70s told us Karen fined her for planting roses that weren't community approved. At another, a father explained how Karen threatened to report him for running a commercial business just because he worked on his car in the driveway. People were scared, but when Sarah spoke, they listened. She didn't just promise them hope, she laid out a plan. She explained how HOA boards operated, how bylaws could be used to challenge abusive board members, and how, if they stood together, they could remove Karen from power. One by one, they agreed to sign affidavits. Some even offered to testify if it came to that. By the end of the weekend, Sarah had compiled a binder thicker than the HOA's own rulebook, filled with witness statements, copied fines, and proof of Karen's harassment. That night, Sarah sat at the table, flipping through the pages. "She thinks she's untouchable," she said softly. "But we're going to show her just how fragile her little empire is." The opportunity came sooner than we expected. Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting, plastering notices on every mailbox. The subject line read, "Community Safety Concerns." Sarah laughed when she saw it. "She's trying to rally the neighbors against us. She wants to make an example of us before anyone else dares resist." The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a sterile little building at the end of the cul-de-sac. When we arrived, nearly 30 neighbors were seated in plastic chairs. Karen stood at the front behind a folding table, flanked by 2 board members who looked more nervous than supportive. The moment we walked in, Karen's voice rose. "There they are, the so-called new owners who think the rules don't apply to them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could feel the tension in the air, the nervous glances, the unspoken fear of crossing Karen. Karen slammed a stack of papers on the table. "In just 3 weeks, they have racked up more violations than any other residents in a year. Noise disturbances, lawn neglect, unauthorized alterations. These are not the kind of people we want in our community." She expected applause. What she got was silence. Sarah stepped forward, calm as ever, and placed her binder on the table beside Karen's stack of papers. The sound echoed like a gavel. "Let's review, shall we?" Sarah said, her voice carrying through the room. She flipped open the binder, pulling out the first affidavit. "This is a signed statement from Mr. Henderson, who was fined $200 for planting roses. Here's one from the Johnson family, fined for the color of their shutters. And here Mrs. Alvarez threatened with eviction for hosting her granddaughter's birthday party in her driveway." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face paled. Sarah didn't stop. She pulled out the handwritten threat Karen had left under our mat and held it up for everyone to see. "And just last week, my family received this. A direct threat from the very person claiming to keep this community safe." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, demanding explanations, some standing up in outrage. Karen tried to wave it off, insisting it wasn't her, but no one was listening. Sarah leaned closer, her voice steady but cutting. "According to the bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 3, board members who engage in harassment or misuse of authority can be removed by a majority vote of the community. I've already filed formal complaints with the county. The only question is whether this community will stand by a bully or take back control." For the first time, Karen looked cornered. Her eyes darted to the board members beside her, but they avoided her gaze. One of them, a gray-haired man who had clearly had enough, finally stood. I motioned to schedule a vote to remove Karen from the board. Cheers erupted. Neighbors clapped, shouted their agreement. The tide had turned. Karen slammed her clipboard down. "You can't do this. I built this community. You'll regret it." But her voice was drowned out by the crowd. For once, she wasn't in control. That night back at home, Sarah poured us both a glass of wine. She looked tired but victorious. "It's not over yet," she said. "The vote will take time and she'll fight tooth and nail. But today we showed her she's not invincible. And soon we'll finish this." I raised my glass. "To the end of Karen's reign." Sarah clinked her glass against mine, her eyes gleaming. "And to her eviction papers." Outside, the street was quiet, but for the first time it didn't feel oppressive. It felt like change was coming. And Karen? She was running out of time. The weeks leading up to the vote felt like living in the eye of a storm. The air was tense, charged, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Karen didn't back down quietly. She doubled down. New notices appeared on doors almost daily. Neighbors were accused of parking violations that didn't exist. Children were told they couldn't play in front yards because It was unsafe, and even the elderly couple at the corner received a warning about unauthorized decorations for hanging a wind chime. It was obvious to everyone that Karen was lashing out, but the more she pushed, the more people turned against her. Meetings sprung up in living rooms and backyards without her. Neighbors who had once whispered their frustrations now spoke openly. People who had been silent for years suddenly stood tall. For the first time, Karen wasn't feared. She was despised. Sarah worked quietly, methodically. Every evening she reviewed the bylaws, case law, and the mountain of evidence we'd collected. She coordinated with neighbors, filed more complaints, and prepared legal documents so airtight no one could wriggle through them. She wasn't just planning to remove Karen from the board. She was planning to dismantle her entirely. The day of the vote arrived. The clubhouse, usually half empty, was packed to the walls. People stood in the aisles, the tension palpable. Karen stood at the front, defiant in a bright red suit, clutching her clipboard like it was the last piece of her power. She launched into a speech, her voice shrill but steady. This community thrives because of order, because of rules. Without them, we'd fall into chaos. I've dedicated years of my life to protecting our standards, and now some outsiders want to undo all of that. Ask yourselves, do you really want lawlessness in your streets? For a moment, there was silence. Then Sarah stepped forward. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her calmness was its own weapon. No one here is asking for lawlessness, she said. We're asking for fairness. We're asking for a community where people aren't fined for planting flowers, or threatened for celebrating birthdays, or harassed in their own homes. Rules are meant to serve the people, not to control them. And when someone abuses that authority, the people have the right to take it back. The room erupted in applause. Karen tried to shout over it, but her words were drowned out. The board members called for the vote. Hands shot up across the room, one after another, until nearly every hand was raised. It was unanimous. Karen was removed. Just like that, her reign crumbled. She stood frozen, her mouth open in disbelief, as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. But Sarah wasn't finished. When the room quieted, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. One more thing, she said. This is a petition, signed by a majority of homeowners and supported by County Housing Authority findings. Effective immediately, Karen is no longer authorized to reside in or represent this community. These, she held up the documents, are eviction papers. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face drained of color. She stumbled forward, shaking her head. You can't do this. You have no right. Sarah's voice cut through her panic, sharp and unwavering. You harassed residents, issued unlawful fines, and even threatened families. You used fear to control people who just wanted to live in peace. And now that ends. Legally, officially, permanently. Karen's hands trembled as she snatched the papers, scanning them with desperate eyes. But she knew. We all knew. It was over. Neighbors began to clap, slowly at first, then louder until the room thundered with cheers. Some hugged each other. Others shouted words of relief. For the first time in years, the community felt free. Karen, however, couldn't bear it. She shouted, screamed, insisted it was all a conspiracy, but no one listened. 2 board members escorted her out of the building, her voice fading into the night. When the door shut behind her, a collective sigh filled the room. People smiled, laughed, and for once, the weight that had hung over this neighborhood was gone. Later that night, Sarah and I sat on our porch. The air was cool, the street quiet. Neighbors waved as they walked by, some stopping to thank us, others simply smiling with a look of relief. I looked at Sarah, the woman who had turned a nightmare into a victory, and said, I don't think Karen will ever forget the moment you handed her those papers. Sarah leaned back, sipping her wine, her eyes glinting in the porch light. She thought she could intimidate me. She thought calling the police would scare me off. But she forgot one thing. What's that? I asked. Her smile was calm, satisfied. You don't scare someone who knows the law better than you do. You end them with it. We sat in silence, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood finally at peace. The war was over. Karen was gone. And our new home, our community, finally felt like the dream we'd been promised. But deep down, I knew this story would be told again and again. About the day the HOA queen called 911 to scare off the new wife, only to have that wife serve her the one set of papers she could never ignore. Eviction papers, And in that, there was justice.